Hello and welcome. I'm Emma Hurt with the headlines that matter most right now. The Trump administration is making a significant diplomatic push toward Iran, sending two of the president's closest advisors to Pakistan this weekend for potential talks. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are heading to Islamabad on Saturday to meet with Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, though Tehran has not officially confirmed the meeting will happen. Watch to see whether face-to-face negotiations can break through years of mistrust between Washington and Tehran. And still on this, a federal appeals court is blocking the Trump administration's asylum ban at the southern border, saying the president can't override immigration law. Our Washington correspondent Marcus Webb has more. Marcus?
Well, Emma, what happened here is pretty significant. The appeals court said Friday that immigration law is pretty clear. People can apply for asylum at the border, and the president can't just suspend that with an executive order, even if he declares it's an invasion. Trump issued an order trying to do exactly that, and the court shut it down.
So what does this actually mean for border operations going forward?
Look, here's the thing. If this stands, the Trump administration's going to have to start processing asylum claims again. That's thousands of cases potentially backed up. Now, DHS is pushing back hard. They're citing security concerns, pointing to cases like that Somali national arrested near the Canada border who was linked to piracy. But the court basically said the president can't use those concerns to override what Congress wrote into law.
Marcus, appreciate it. Remaining with world affairs, the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon just got a 3-week extension, but fighting on the ground hasn't actually stopped. Our Middle East correspondent Layla Nazari has more on what's really happening. Layla?
That's right, Emma. So technically there's a ceasefire in place, but Israeli forces have killed 6 Hezbollah fighters just in the last few days in southern Lebanon. And in Gaza, at least 12 Palestinians have died during this so-called truce. The Trump administration just announced the 3-week extension, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio doing the heavy lifting on negotiations. But here's the thing. Nobody's really stopping the military operations.
So what does Lebanon actually want out of these talks if fighting continues anyway?
Well, look, Prime Minister Nawaf Salam is counting on Trump to put real pressure on Israel. He's telling us privately that any permanent deal has to include a full Israeli withdrawal from the buffer zones Israel seized during this conflict. That's Lebanon's red line. The question is whether the Trump administration has the appetite to actually push Israel that hard, or if these 3 weeks are just buying time before everything falls apart again.
Layla, appreciate the reporting on the ground. Moving to the markets now, Google just made one of the biggest AI bets we've seen yet. Our finance editor, Sophia Reeves, is here with the details. Sophia?
Well, Emma, thanks. So Google announced it's putting up to $40 billion into Anthropic, the company behind the Claude AI model. That's a massive investment in both cash and computing resources. What's interesting is this comes just days after Amazon made a smaller investment in the same company. So you're really seeing this race heat up for AI infrastructure.
Why are these tech giants spending this kind of money on Anthropic specifically?
Look, here's the thing. Compute capacity is everything right now in AI. You need massive amounts of computing power to train and run these models. Google's betting that by backing Anthropic, they're not only getting a stake in a cutting-edge AI company, they're also securing influence over where the technology goes and how it develops. It's about control of the market, really.
Appreciate it, Sophia. The Justice Department is closing its criminal investigation into outgoing Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. The move clears the way for Trump's Fed nominee Kevin Warsh to move toward confirmation. Marcus rejoins me now. Marcus, why is this investigation being dropped right now?
Well, Emma, the DOJ announced Friday they're ending the criminal probe into Powell's handling of the Fed building renovations. Trump had originally accused Powell of cost overruns on the project, but now the investigation's just done. No charges were filed, and honestly, the timing here is pretty significant because it removes a major obstacle for Warsh's confirmation hearings.
So does this mean there wasn't enough evidence to pursue the case?
Look, the Justice Department isn't saying much about why they're closing it, but what we do know is that Powell's investigation wouldn't normally impact Warsh's nomination. That said, having an active federal probe into your predecessor during confirmation hearings, that's messy. The real question now is whether this was closed on the merits or because the administration wanted it done quickly. Either way, Warsh's path to leading the Fed just got a whole lot clearer.
Marcus, thank you. Also on the world front, the Trump administration is reportedly considering sending more than 1,000 Afghan interpreters and military aides to the Democratic Republic of Congo instead of allowing them to resettle in America. The move comes after the administration ended a program designed to help these Afghan nationals who work directly with U.S. forces. Layla rejoins me now. Layla, why is this such a significant departure from previous policy?
Well, Emma, here's the thing. For decades, the U.S. has had this unwritten obligation to protect foreign nationals who worked with American military operations. These are interpreters, guides, soldiers who literally put their lives on the line. The fact that the administration is now talking about redirecting them to Congo instead of processing them for U.S. resettlement is pretty striking. It's a signal that priorities have shifted significantly.
And how are Afghan advocacy groups responding to this proposal?
Look, they're alarmed, honestly. Organizations working with Afghan refugees are saying this violates a fundamental commitment, that the United States doesn't abandon people who helped protect American troops. Congo itself is dealing with serious humanitarian crises, weak infrastructure, and security problems. So for Afghans who've already survived Taliban threats and years of uncertainty, being sent there feels like they're being pushed off a cliff, not actually being helped. The legal challenges are already starting to mount.
Layla, thanks for the context on this. Remaining with world affairs, a Pentagon email obtained Friday outlined potential punishment for NATO allies, including Spain, deemed insufficiently supportive of military action against Iran, raising serious questions about the future of transatlantic unity. NATO officials quickly responded that the alliance charter contains no provision to expel members and that such decisions require consensus among all 32 member states. Watch for formal statements from European governments and NATO leadership in the coming days as they respond to what many are calling an unprecedented threat to the 75-year-old alliance. Also on the world front, Hezbollah says it carried out multiple attacks against Israeli forces in southern Lebanon, where residents describe conditions as catastrophic under occupation. The escalation threatens to destabilize the region as humanitarian needs grow increasingly dire. Watch for any shift in international response to the deepening crisis. Moving to the markets now, a nuclear startup just had one of the hottest debuts we've seen in years, and it tells us something crucial about where billions of dollars think the future of energy is headed. Sophia rejoins me now. Sophia, what's driving all this investor excitement around X Energy?
Well, Emma, you're talking about a 27% pop on the first day of trading. That's significant. Essentially, X Energy is building small modular nuclear reactors, and investors are betting that AI data centers are going to need massive amounts of reliable, clean power. Amazon's backing them. The company upsized its IPO because demand was just too strong to ignore.
So why is nuclear suddenly the hot tech play when it's been a dead letter in Silicon Valley for years?
Look, AI data centers consume staggering amounts of electricity. We're talking about tripling power demand in the next 5 years. Traditional solar and wind can't scale fast enough to handle that, and companies don't want the PR hit of powering AI with coal plants. That's where X Energy comes in. Their reactors are smaller, faster to build theoretically, and they can be placed closer to where the power is actually needed. It's not about climate virtue signaling anymore. It's about necessity.
But modular nuclear reactors have never been deployed at scale. How real is this opportunity?
That's the million-dollar question, honestly. Regulatory approval takes years. Construction always costs more than projected. And we still don't have a permanent solution for nuclear waste. So yes, the stock had an amazing day, but the real test is whether they can actually deliver hardware on timeline and on budget. That's what separates the winners from the hype in this space.
Sophia, thank you. An internal Pentagon document has reportedly raised the prospect of reconsidering American support for UK sovereignty over the Falkland Islands, allegedly as retaliation for Britain declining to join U.S. military action against Iran. Downing Street has firmly rejected any suggestion of negotiation, reaffirming that sovereignty over the Falklands rests unequivocally with Britain. The reported review highlights growing tensions within the US-UK alliance over military commitments in the Middle East. Now, our in-depth analysis of the day, the story dominating the headlines examined from every angle. Two senior American envoys are wheels up to Islamabad tonight, heading for what could be the most consequential diplomatic encounter since this conflict began. And yet Iran is publicly denying any meeting is even planned. The gap between what Washington is saying and what Tehran is saying may itself be the story. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Emma. Look, what we're watching in real time is a conflict where the diplomatic signaling is almost as chaotic as the battlefield itself. Witkoff and Kushner are heading to Islamabad. The White House is briefing optimistically, and simultaneously, Tehran says there's no meeting planned. That contradiction isn't a glitch, it's a feature of how Iran negotiates. They don't want to appear to be running toward the table. But here's what worries me most. Analysts speaking to CNN News 18 are raising serious questions about whether Khamenei is even alive, and if the IRGC's hardline generals are actually calling the shots now, that changes everything. You can't cut a deal with a foreign minister if the real decision-makers are generals who don't want one.
Sophia, from your perspective, what does this diplomatic uncertainty mean for the broader economic picture, particularly with the Strait of Hormuz now directly in play?
Well, honestly, the Strait of Hormuz is the number that keeps energy markets up at night. Around 20% of global oil supply transits that waterway, and the moment Hegseth starts talking about dynamic targeting of Iranian assets in that strait, traders hear something very specific: potential supply shock. I think what we're seeing is a situation where the markets are pricing in extended uncertainty rather than outright escalation. But that calculation is fragile, and the foreign affairs warning that this war is already a net win for China matters economically too. If Washington is distracted and weakened going into the Exine meeting, the leverage dynamics on trade and broader economic competition shift in Beijing's favor.
Marcus, final thought, where does this go from here?
My assessment is that we're heading for the middle scenario. Not peace, not full escalation, but another extension of managed uncertainty. The pattern over the past 6 or 7 weeks has been consistent. The U.S. threatens to escalate, Iran doesn't blink, and the ceasefire gets extended. I don't see why Islamabad breaks that cycle unless there's something genuinely new on the table. The wild card, and it's a big one, is that if Khamenei really is gone and the IRGC is in control, these talks might be theater. The real negotiation, if it happens at all, will look very different from a foreign ministers' meeting in a Pakistani capital.
Thank you both. Marcus, Sophia, really valuable perspective tonight. Appreciate it. The Justice Department has dropped its criminal probe into Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, but the damage to the principle of central bank independence may already be done. This story is about far more than a building renovation. It's about who controls American monetary policy and whether the presidency can bend independent institutions to its will. Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Emma. Look, the headline is that the probe is dropped. And on one level, that's the right outcome. Because frankly, this investigation was always on shaky legal ground. Powell himself said publicly, and quite bluntly, that the renovation charges were a pretext, that the real issue was interest rates and who gets to set them. What's significant is that a sitting Fed chair felt he had no choice but to say that out loud. That doesn't happen. And Republican Senator Tom Tillis, who's not running again and therefore has nothing to lose politically, said the DOJ's credibility was now in question alongside the Fed's. That's a serious bipartisan alarm bell, even if most of his colleagues stayed silent.
James, from your perspective, how does the rest of the world read what just happened here?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that the international signal is already baked in, and it's not a good one. Al Jazeera's analyst Eric Ham made the point that global investors have always priced the US dollar's attractiveness partly on the Fed's independence. It's a foundational assumption. The moment you open a criminal probe into a central bank chair over what looks like a rate-setting dispute dressed up as a renovation scandal, you've planted a seed of doubt. And here's the thing, even dropping the probe doesn't fully erase that. Markets remember. And with Kevin Warsh now moving toward confirmation, the question everyone's asking quietly is whether he'll feel the weight of this episode when he's sitting in that chair making rate decisions.
Sophia, final thought. Where does this go from here?
My assessment is that the most likely outcome isn't dramatic. It's subtle, and that's what makes it concerning. We're probably not going to see overt political interference in rate setting. What we might see instead is a Fed chair who's simply more cautious about crossing the White House, who internalizes the lesson of what happened to Powell. That's how institutional independence erodes, not with a bang, but with a series of small accommodations. The 1970s comparison that analysts have raised isn't hyperbole. When monetary policy drifts toward political convenience, you get inflation and recession. That's the real stakes here, and it's why this story matters long after the DOJ announcement fades from the headlines.
Thank you both. Sophia, James, really important context on a story that's moving fast. Appreciate it. That wraps up today's top stories. I'm Emma Hurt. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.